Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. On this episode of the podcast, my guest is Ryan Flickner. Ryan Flickner is Senior Director of Advocacy at Kansas Farm Bureau and a sixth-generation farmer at Flickner Farms in McPherson County. He has also worked for former Senator Pat Roberts in several different capacities, including Senior Director of Public Policy. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you, Aaron.
I always like to ask people in your position, you were in D.C. where people were coming to you, asking you for assistance with things, and now you're the one who's coming to D.C. on behalf of wheat farmers asking for things. So you've seen it from both perspectives policy-wise. And I'm just curious on how it's different from both sides of the table.
Yeah, I don't know how long this podcast wants to roll on. We could dissect that a number of different ways, and I would even add in, not that internships matter, they do, and that's kind of where I got the bug. I actually started my time in D.C., and I had the privilege of also interning over at USDA during President W. Bush's term, and I was there the very last bit of Ann Veneman when she was secretary, and got to transition and do some intern kind of leg work, busy work, if you will, as they swore in Mike Johans as secretary. So it is very different to be the one that is sitting on the side of the table where somebody's asking you, will you support, will you oppose, can we do this, can we not? But knowing that, now that I'm on the other side of the table, when I ask on behalf of farmers and ranchers all across this great state, hopefully the background, hopefully the context, the real life experience that I have being on that other side previously, hopefully that helps me be more relatable, more punctual, to the direct point. Like, we're not here to exchange pleasantries for hours on end. I need to go in, build that relationship obviously at first, but then when I go into the office, make the direct ask known. And then, hey, will you support this? Will you oppose that? Sometimes offices are very good about saying, heck yeah, we will. Other times, hey, I got to run it up the chain of command. And then there's always those times, and I think you'll probably dive deeper into a question down the road on this, but it's really no different than marriage or a family business or anything else that we do in life. Most of the time, or all the time, I probably don't even agree with my own self, 100% of the time, let alone my wonderful wife. So as you can find the areas of agreement, if you can find somebody you agree with 6, 7, 8 times out of 10, I think that's a pretty good relationship. So I try to take that mentality, where can I build alliances, where can I find friends, how can I build a coalition, really into about every argument or every debate, because far too long we find the things that we vehemently disagree on. Think that's what we're kind of living out on media right now, but I think there are so many other things that bring us together, that unify us as Kansans, as Americans, as farmers and ranchers, that really suit us well.
Well, that's refreshing to hear. Our producer Dave and I were talking just a few minutes ago about statesmanship and bipartisanship, and it's always been special in Kansas that we have such a small congressional delegation. Like, you go to D.C., you can visit all the offices, right? You've got the 4 and the 2, and I think it's nice to know that the Kansas relationships with constituencies are still really personable. Is it the same as it was when you began all those years ago?
All those years ago, I mean, it was a different era in politics, and I guess the Chinese proverbs of may you live in interesting times, and boy do we ever. So yeah, even when I started originally first working for Senator Roberts, that was the very end of the Bush administration. And I was there for the transition from Senator Obama to President Obama, and then, now what we've lived more recently. So politics is very, very different today, whether some of that is journalistic integrity, if I can use that word. Because when I first started working at USDA, started working for Senator Roberts, email was the way to more or less communicate. But man alive, now, Aaron, how many followers does this podcast have on X? And you're probably on Instagram and TikTok and everything else. And I'm not saying that, in a mean-spirited way, that there's not beneficial or positive influences of social media. But when every human out there is their very own journalist, And now you add AI into the mix, and you really have a challenging time separating truth from fiction. But I think, what I've seen, to your point, on the 6 in the Kansas delegation, they want facts. They want to hear from a bona fide, trustworthy, reliable producer. That's not always the case, depending on the issue, depending on the member of Congress back in D.C. Sometimes certain politicians are there for headlines and headlines only. But I do think, using a term that's been around for a while, Kansas and the Kansas politicians, we punch above our weight. We know we're a small but mighty state. I mean, just look back at history, and then even before Dole and Kassebaum, you had some very powerful senators, some very powerful members of Congress that I believe were there at that particular time to do right by Kansas. So to speak, bring the bacon home for middle of America state that certainly didn't have a power of a New York City or a California or wherever the power impetus was at that particular point in history.
Yeah, well, and we lead as Kansans, and when I think about Farm Bureau, Kansas Farm Bureau, the word grassroots comes to mind, and I think it's always been important to Farm Bureau, the local participation. Are you seeing the excitement, the energy to participate at that political level from farmers across the state change over the last decade?
Ooh, change is inevitable. We, see really the elder statesmen, as they age, they carry weight and they have a presence when they enter a room. Some of those folks, and even, and I've told people this before, so I'll go on the record here on the Wheats on Your Mind podcast and say it. I mean, the position that I have at Kansas Farm Bureau, I do not take lightly. I truly am standing on the shoulders of giants. When you look at the names like a Paul Flickner, a John Blythe, even more recent, you had Patty Clark, you had Harry Watts, you had Terry Holdren. I mean, there are a lot of folks that have been in my seat, so to speak, and have done really tremendous work. I mean, look at use value here in the state. I mean, thank Paul Flickner and John Blythe and some of the lobby team at Farm Bureau at that particular juncture in state history. So I guess what I've kind of seen in my public service career, if you will, people get disenfranchised. Yes, you have a gripe with government, so you want recourse. You go to your elected official at the local, state, federal level. At one point in time, I think, you could get that changed probably as an individual. What I've seen now, and probably more at the federal level than anywhere else, we're doing omnibus bills. I mean, we're just mega packaging things together into a single you must pass piece of legislation. And year-round E15, prime example. Like, this has been, I think, a no-brainer all across the ag industry for years and years. Let's go year-round E15. But the powers that be, it's not germane to this bill, or we've got to get National Defense Authorization Act redone. And some of the things that we've been asking for in agriculture just kind of, they don't meet that threshold. Same challenge we've had with the Farm Bill, and we can take this a whole bunch of different directions. When you look at the most recent passed Farm Bill of 2018, that was Pat Roberts. Mm-hmm. He had 86 or 87 votes in the United States Senate for a farm bill, the most ever for a farm bill, going back to the first Agricultural Adjustment Act in the 1930s. So that was certainly filibuster-proof, getting over the 60-vote threshold. But after we've gotten that bill passed, I mean, we've been at loggerheads in 2023, 2024, 2025. We've now had to extend the Farm Bill 2 years. We need to do it again before we hit the dairy cliff. So I guess what I maybe see in the natural decorum, we have not. There are still kingmakers, to use Flinchbaugh's terms. There are still kingmakers out there. There's a whole bunch of other people kind of behind them, but for whatever reason, we just have not been able to get back to quote unquote regular order or passing piecemeal pieces of legislation that have a huge impact on rural America and farming and ranching. Whether that's because we just need to hold out for the mega bill and the one bill that can move, or we just need Congress to actually do their job and hold hearings, hold debates, hold markups on bills, get back to, use another Flinchbaugh term, get back to compromise. That's not a dirty word. If we can agree on 60 to 80% of something, maybe we should let the majority rule and get that across the finish line rather than holding out for the perfect bill, because that is just not possible in today's environment.
I will put you on the spot pretty early on here in the podcast, and since you kind of teed it up, I mean, what's the future of the Farm Bill? Was this the last Farm Bill?
I don't think it's the last farm bill, but we've been wrestling with this in my now 12 years working for Kansas Farm Bureau. I had the pleasure and privilege of serving on some task forces that AFBF, American Farm Bureau Federation, put together. And I'll keep going back to Flinchbach because we both know him and miss him dearly. You know, farm bills oftentimes are evolutionary, not revolutionary. But we may be at this period in time where it's time to get revolutionary when we talk about farm policy. And you have a number of members, number of producers out there that are non-program participating. They don't go into FSA or NRCS. They just kind of are self-insured or they figured out a way to do it on their own. But with the political reality, the economic reality out there today, what is the appropriate safety net? And if we want to be food secure and have national security, then this is a whole different kind of conversation. Maybe we've taken that too granted over the last couple of decades, that food security is national security. Well, is it when you're talking about really 8 covered commodities? I mean, yeah, wheat's really important, but with the MAHA movement, with the My Plate, with the food guide pyramid, you go on and on and on and on, our fruits and vegetables just not as important. Mm-hmm. So when you start looking at it from a global perspective or even the all 50 state perspective, I do believe that farm policy will be different in the future than it has. And I don't know what that epiphany moment is. I don't know who's going to stand up and say, ARC and PLC, yeah, really important, but what about this moving forward? And this actually does provide a better safety net. How do we get that entered into the policy debate? How do we get the 218 in the United States House of Representatives, 51 in the United States Senate, or even 60 in the United States Senate to get it across to being signed into law? And we could take this a lot of different ways. I mean, farm savings accounts keep coming up.
Yeah.
Tax policy, very, very important. Is tax policy more foundational and fundamental and important today than tried and true USDA policy? That's something that we're starting to ask those tough questions within the Farm Bureau family of how can we be most effective to make sure that this farm ranch operation that may be in the family for 5, 6, 7 generations, or you may be a first generation, how do you transition that down the road?
Yeah, great points. And you talk about how farming policy is going to look different. Trade policy already looks different.
Oh boy!
Right now.
Oh boy!
It's so much different. Yeah,
we have policy on trade.
Well, I don't know. You tell me. I'll premise this and try not to get political. I don't know if in my lifetime I've seen a president talk as much about farmers and agriculture as President Trump. Maybe you disagree with that, but his approach to trade is obviously unique. From a Kansas Farm Bureau's perspective, how do you work with this?
I have to work with it, like it or not. And again, I'm a huge fan of context, of background, history, and maybe, you can edit this out down the road if you don't want it. But my grandfather, Gerald Persinger, was super involved in Kansas wheat, actually, when they were headquartered down in Hutchinson. Yeah. And he went back to Washington, D.C. in the 60s and 70s, even a little bit in the early 80s, to advocate on trade. I mean, he'd been over to Cuba representing wheat multiple times. And again, that was a very different political time that he was super involved with Kansas wheat at that. But yeah, the trade front, I guess as I said here on October 22nd, the announcement of this Argentinian beef. I mean, how do you marry up, we want to bring in beef from Argentina under an America First policy?
Yeah.
And, historically, this president has said foreign steel and aluminum is bad, but now we're going to say foreign high quality, or whether it's high quality or not, foreign protein is good. I just don't understand how that quite marries up. But if you look at it, I guess fundamentally, if you believe in free and fair trade, and I realize nothing's free and probably nothing's fair, but if you look at trade, how we break down barriers, the amount of wheat, the amount of corn, the amount of high quality beef protein, even swine protein we have here in the United States, even in Kansas. Kansans can't consume all the wheat that we grow. We've got to have an export market somewhere. I think that's where we need to have the honest conversation. How do we get to value added? And whether it was Russian grain embargo, whether it was some of the context both of President Nixon and then President Carter on embargoes and rationing fuel and so on and so forth, there was a previous generation where we incentivized radically South America to produce. I think we're going to look back at this particular point in history to say, well, if whatever we created in that 60s, 70s, 80s period, I mean, we just added a whole bunch of fuel to this fire and have told our competitors, like, hey, you're going to be the low-cost bulk producer. So, go fence row to fence row and break out, grass and expand into forest and do whatever you do. So moving forward as America, do we move more to a higher value commodity? Do we segregate things? The world's just going to look different. What I've told folks that have a lot of faith in this president, and again, like whoever's president, I've always taken the mentality like they're the pilot of the airplane. I want the president to succeed, whomever they are, which political party. Let's land this baby. Let's hold it together. So, I'm not speaking any ill will, about previous presidents, the current president, but I think as we look at trade policy and we go back to Economics 101, what is the United States' competitive advantage? Where do we exceed more so than other nations have? And that ebbs and flows and changes over time. We can also talk about demographic cliffs and, China, namely. I mean, are they at peak population? So this whole business of, hey, there's going to be 8 billion people on the planet by 2050, does that hold? I don't know. But I think that's where we've got to start having some very frank, whether they're intellectual debates or not, at least conversations about what is the future of Mother Earth here, the population trends, economic wherewithal of the growing middle class globally, and what products are they going to demand, or what, more importantly, what products will they actually purchase moving forward? And I don't know, I hope those conversations are taking place when it comes to trade policy and trade philosophy. I'm sure you guys have talked with Greg Dowd and others. I think the fundamental philosophy of this president is there is no free access to the American consumer. I mean, we have moved away from building things here in America, and we've, quite frankly, moved to a consumer-oriented society. I mean, look at all the stuff that you can buy on Amazon today and everywhere else. It'll be here, not necessarily in Manhattan, Kansas, or Marshall County, but in certain areas of the state, you can order it and it will be delivered that same day. So if we know that we consume things here and we still are price point dependent as Americans, what retribution or what retaliation, not to be negative on the retaliation, but what consequences are there for another country to take American products and make it more of a free and fair trade discussion? So yes, China, bad actors on a number of fronts, a day of reckoning was bound to happen. But when you look at it, our friends from soybean and grain sorghum, they have been hugely dependent on that one nation to import their product. So I think having other supply chains, other purchasers out there are very, very important. But I don't know if we can export ourselves out of the hole that we have currently dug.
Yeah, and we talk about the policy, trade policy, or lack thereof. It has forced us to make hard decisions, as you mentioned, with sorghum not having all our eggs in one basket. The flip side of that is inputs, especially for farmers. We lean on China so much for our input side of that. I was watching a CNBC video about how America was going to onshore rare earth minerals, right? We've got them here in the country. We can get them. Little asterisks there. It takes reagents to get the minerals separated from clay in the soil. Guess who supplies the reagents? China, right? So there's just so many aspects of that when you dig in. What is agriculture? Are we taking a fresh look at inputs, fertilizer? How we can make those more affordable for our farmers coming in this new environment?
I think there's a lot of conversations taking place. Even Secretary Rollins announced over at the Kansas City Agribusiness Forum yet another study or investigation between DOJ and USDA on anti-competitive practices and monopolistic behavior. Seems like, especially in the cattle industry, maybe those studies and products are never ending, because I think there was an announcement on one of those that originated really early in COVID and still no final report. So yeah, I mean, how whether we want to talk environmental laws, whether we want to talk labor laws, are there rare earth minerals here in the United States? Absolutely. Do we have access to them? Is the permitting process viable, or even can you move through that process? I think those are conversations that we have to have from a policy perspective. And then I think, again, another dirty word, and it comes back to compromise. When I go talk to agribusinesses, when I talk to use the aim point, kind of the farmer of the future, those that are really doing cool things out there and are going to be the farmer of the future, they want to know, they want predictability and certainty. There is no guarantee in life other than two things, taxes and death, and I think we would all admit to that. But if you're going to make a sizable financial investment, whether you're an operator and you want to expand equipment line, add some land, or if you're an agribusiness, or if you're a Fortune whatever company, that certainty and predictability over a period of time, 5, 10, 15, 30 years, that certainty gives you the opportunity to go to the bank to say, hey, I believe in my cause. I believe in my family being able to expand this even after I'm gone. I believe in the shareholders. They'll continue to grow it. But I think we've been in such a flip-flop. The political winds change so frequently. We got to find the perfect candidate that we agree with 9 or 10 out of 10 times on. And I think that uncertainty has really, the stock market and the economy has done remarkably well, even coming out of and through COVID. But I think for the longer term objectivity and the ability to really make generational transformational decisions, that uncertainty is hovering over all of our heads.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the economic situation a little bit. I know you're a policy guy, but you and your dad also are farmers, and you have your finger on the pulse of the agriculture economy. So what are your members telling you right now?
Row crop agriculture is tough. Again, what we just talked about, input prices are much, much higher than they have been historically, whether the farm gate receipts out the back end, what you actually produce, not that they're at historic lows, because they're certainly not. In some cases, especially over the last couple of years, we've been able to make up for marginal losses on volume with bushels. But those input prices, those are the ones that are really kind of the Achilles heel right now of production ag. On the flip side, our cattle producers, they had a rough go of it right smack dab in the middle of COVID. Other things certainly out of their control, multi-year droughts, number of just other challenges that they were having. But the cattle herd is really at historic lows now, and supply demand 101. We got low supply, but we still have high demand. Americans and global consumers continue to demand high quality protein, so they're continuing to buy the higher cuts of meat when they go to the grocery store. They're still dining out. And yes, Americans, we love our hamburger and our ground beef, whether it's going to a fast food restaurant or it's just grinding up some beef and putting it in the spaghetti or another product at home. So the demand has held steady. And I think that's the really bright spot right now, is the protein sector is doing fairly well. If you're a diversified operator, that more than on average, that more than offsets the losses that or the struggles you're having on the row crop. But I don't know if I'm always a hopeful person. I think that's why we're sowing wheat back on the farm this week, because we're hopeful that there will be yields and there will be a good price, and come next June we'll be able to sell that and live to fight another day. So I think the farmer continues to be the eternal optimist. But as we just look at some of these sticky issues when it comes to the economics of agriculture, whether we want to blame it on all the inflationary dollars that America, Congress pumped into the stream through COVID, even some of the ad hoc assistance, whether farmers and ranchers needed it. And I think that's a challenge, that there are regional discrepancies. I'm not disparaging or knocking down some of the challenges that the rice and the peanuts and the cotton folks have had more recently, but I don't know if I've had too many farmers just telling me the last 2 or 3 years, that market facilitation program, or that ad hoc disaster payment that the Congress passed last December, that's what kept me afloat. And I think some of that does come back the fact that Kansans were high risk agriculture, so especially the further west you go, you hit it big, really big 1 or 2 years. You kind of live to fight another day, 3 or 4 years, and there's probably 50% of the time that you're just you're not breaking even. So I think the Kansas mentality, if you squirrel enough away to fight another day and you build that equity and continue to do what you do, I think our producers, by and large, from Kansas have been better off or have at least held steady. But yeah, when you start pumping artificial dollars into the system, of course you're going to have inflationary reactions. And I think that's kind of what we've seen specifically on the input side, whether you're talking chemical, fertilizer, seed cost, and then you get into the whole geopolitical world, Ukraine, Russia, and just other, labor challenge, environmental challenges when it comes to actually, can you produce this chemical here in the United States, or are we solely dependent on a foreign country to get our base product in?
Yeah, I heard you say the word high risk, and
yeah.
and one of the soapboxes we get on with Kansas wheat and other commodity groups is how different agriculture is in the high plains of the United States. And I'm curious, when you talk to your peers in other farm bureaus in the states where it rains, and regulatory and policy people, how hard is it to get that fact across? Don't forget about us out here when you're talking about renewable aviation fuel and things like that. What are the challenges? Big challenges.
This even goes back to some of my time with Senator Roberts. Before the 11 and 12 mega drought that it really did impact all the United States. There were some crop reporting districts, some counties, specifically Minnesota, Illinois, I think even in Iowa, that they had not had their loss ratio on crop insurance wasn't negative going back the previous 20 years, which is great. That's great. Good for them. So their premiums, their rates were much lower. But boy, howdy, when you actually have a 2011 to 2012 drought, their losses were astronomical. So I think that's kind of one of the challenges is describing that is, that's a whole different environment. You don't have too many losses very often, but when you have a loss, it's a mega, mega loss. Counter that with what we kind of see in the semi-arid high plains region. We have a lot more losses. Mm-hmm. But I would say, I'd have some producers that would disagree with me that they're a shallow loss versus a deep loss.
Right.
But I think, again, that ebb and flow of what your APH is versus what your percentage off is, that's within a much narrower range. And I think that's just, slow and steady, kind of some other areas, the ice states namely, but then some natural disaster or ratio, whatever flood happens, it is a major, major loss. And those producers may not have had the experience of, oh my gosh, how do I survive this? Where again, in high risk agriculture, we're used to dust blowing, and we're used to hot days, and we're used to locusts and whatever else it may be. So we know that we always have to have a little bit more savings. We got to squirrel a little bit more away. But we're also much more appreciative, I think, to the good man upstairs when we have those record yields. Like, hey, this was out of my control, but thank you, good Lord, for blessing me with this. And I'm going to be a good steward, and I'm going to tithe some of it away. I'm going to save some of it away. I'm going to do what I have to do.
I want to talk on a couple of specific issues before we wrap up and get the Kansas Farm Bureau perspective. One of them is farm labor. I know you guys have got a really cool program called the Rural Kansas Apprenticeship Program. The labor force in agriculture. What's Kansas Farm Bureau doing?
The labor force in agriculture is challenging, and I think we have heard this, and this is my shtick when I go around the country now, is whether I'm in Wallace County or Wyandotte County, labor tends to be the number one issue, or lack thereof, tends to be the number one issue that members, farmers, ranchers are bringing up. So, we're working on a whole bunch of stuff at the federal level. We've got some H-2A challenges, the seasonality of it, the cap on it. Did have some good announcements earlier this year here in 2025 on the adverse effective wage rate, getting some significant changes there. But we know that Congress struggles to do just about anything right now. So we've tried to look at other avenues. How can we help our members and the general ag economy do better on the entire workforce development? Many, many other industries out there have used apprenticeship programs for years, but it's relatively new in the agricultural space. And give Farm Bureau credit, give our board of directors credit. Joel Leftwich is doing great things as our chief strategy officer. But what basically or fundamentally we're trying to do is if you're a hay and forage guy, you're a dairy producer, you're, row cropper, whatever aspect of agriculture, how do we figure out those skills and apprenticeship type training that will bring you in? Because typically what we've seen is when we bring an apprentice in and we coach them and we guide them and we give them appropriate oversight, they are much more willing to stick around and even move up the ladder on chain of command and management type decisions than if you just post something on Facebook Marketplace, or you post something in your help wanted ads. So we've got a number of ancillary industries, the grain and feed type folks, the co-ops out there, some agribusinesses that are making bale beds or something like that. They've used our program to develop that appropriate skill set and had some really good work. But now we're trying to really move that into the production ag. So again, when you're talking about, are you a private applicator? Hey, here's the apprenticeship training to make sure that you get your private applicator. And if you find somebody that really excels in the spray world, maybe that same individual wants to move over from the private applicator and actually take the commercial applicator license. So therefore you can expand and get another value-added business on your operation. Because once you're commercial, then you can actually go out and start spraying for some of the neighbors. So those are some of the examples that RCAP, that Rural Kansas Apprenticeship Program, is using. But hopefully that continues. I mean, our goal is for it to be a snowball effect. Let's prove ourselves in a couple of proof of concepts and get some good employees out there that continue on to do great things. And if that does well by word of mouth, it will continue to snowball into other industries in agriculture.
Great program. Water issue. Farm Bureau certainly got a seat at the table there when it comes to the water problem in Kansas, which is growing and growing. What do you expect out of the state legislature this coming year?
I probably don't expect too much out of the state legislature in general this next session. It's going to be a campaign year. We've got the president of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, both campaigning for statewide offices. There's another number of other rank and file members of the legislature also seeking other statewide offices. The initial agenda that came out earlier, I think here in October, late September, talked about another condensed 90-day session, 90 calendar days, really trying to wrap up by late March, early April. So, water is hugely important. There's going to be a big conversation on taxes and revenues because the budget does not look all that rosy. Moving forward over in the Topeka legislative session. And then I think you're going to continue to kind of see discussion on various social issues just because it is a campaign season. But yeah, when we talk about water, I think the average Kansan knows more about water today than they did 8 years ago. Just because we've lived through some more droughts, we've had some communities, namely in eastern Kansas, that have had major challenges on their public water supply system. Just north of where we're recording this podcast, we've got this injection dredging happening at Tuttle. So even from the surface water quality and quantity, it's becoming a better topic. But I still think that we have a long road of education to go. Far too many think that you just buy the loaf of bread at the grocery store. It's made in a back room somewhere. I think the same challenge is on water. They just think when they turn on the tap water and the faucet, water will continue to run indefinitely. And Aaron, you and I both know that's not how it works. We've got natural resource concerns out there. We've got groundwater challenges throughout really the western half of Kansas. We've got a number of surface water challenges in south central and eastern Kansas. So to make sure that agriculture has a seat at the table, so we are protecting our natural resources, is very important. But just as important, I think by and large, we need to make sure that farmers and ranchers don't just think of water as irrigation or stock water. I don't know how your personal residence is, but you go out west and every home more or less has their own individual domestic water supply, their own individual well. And thanks to KDHE and thanks to the Kansas Geological Survey, KGS, over at KU, there's been an intentional effort to go test and monitor private domestic wells. Talking with Farm Bureau members that have signed up for that, they they're sadly disappointed when they get the results of the quality of water that was sampled, because it's coming back high in nitrate, it's coming back with total dissolved solids, it's coming back with some issue. And ignorance, as we know, ignorance is not bliss. You really want to know what is in the water that you're drinking and consuming and bathing and showering and all of that. So I think the more education we have, and I also think the other thing on the domestic water supply, we've had a couple of conversations at the state legislature with Kansas Department of Agriculture on impairment, meaning, we, all three of us in the room here today, we each have our own well, but you might be the most senior. There's a process out there to say, if I came in more junior and I'm pumping the water out from under you, then I'm therefore impairing. One thing that's been neglected, quite frankly, through the state legislature and over at the Department of Agriculture, and we've had this conversation with the chief engineer many, many times, a domestic water source oftentimes is the most senior water right out there. Might not be a file of record. Your great-grandfather, when they put up the sod house, they might not have said, this natural spring out my back door where I my herd of cattle were, or the windmill that I put up in 1922. I pumped water into a stock tank, but I didn't make that a matter of record.
Right.
And there's a process by which we all can do that, but it's cumbersome, it's burdensome. But I think that's one of the fears or the conversations that we're at least having in the Farm Bureau world is, if this were just Hurricane Katrina and wiped an entire city off the map, or Greensburg, a lot of attention was given to Greensburg tornado back in 2007. But if we lose one domestic well this month, we lose two domestic wells next month, but they're in completely different parts of the state, I don't know if people notice that. And I think that's one of the things that we've got to be very intentional about the future of Kansas. If we no longer have enough groundwater to be able to pump out to put into a home, a residence, a single residence in parts of Kansas over the next 30 years, how do you support a local economy? You got to have a house, you got to have people there working and living. This isn't something that, everybody's just going to move to town. If that's what it is, then hello, Buffalo Commons, here we come, whether that was the intentional decision or not.
Yeah. If you want people to stay in rural America, got to have water.
Got to have water.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, great talking with you. I do need to have you and your dad, Ray, on sometime to talk about the Flickner Innovation Farm, but just give us the elevator pitch on what the farm is and what's the new exciting research you're doing there.
Yeah, so Flickner Farms have actually been around since my forefathers and foremothers, I guess, came over on 3 separate boats from what is modern-day Ukraine, but they ultimately settled in 1874 in McPherson County, just southern McPherson County, and brought over a lot of the original turkey red winter wheat.
Yeah,
so got a lot of history there. But really, over the 151 years we've been in existence now, we've been innovating, and I throw that out there because my granddad punched the one of the first irrigation water rights, the most senior water right out of the city of Mount Ridges. We're still pumping water out of it. It's been the same hole that we're pumping water out since 1955. We've grown catfish commercially in a number of fish ponds. Dad installed subsurface drip back in 2001. Now have quite a few acres of that. But I guess through a various conversation and it came back in 2019, we officially branded Flickner Innovation Farm, doing a lot of really cool stuff. In 19, the goal was to really focus in on irrigation. And we've talked with DWR. The Flickner operation is using approximately 60% of the county average when it comes to irrigation. So we have a 40% conservation factor. So that's near and dear, knowing that we've got some groundwater decline, we've got some water quality issues in the local community. But since 2019, we've branded out a little bit. We've done a lot on soil fertility, soil health. We've got 2 of we actually had the very first 360 rain unit that's in the state of Kansas. We've had that one operational for 2 years now. This year, here in 25, we added a second 360 rain unit to the operation. Dad predominantly. I kind of dab my toe, I guess, from a Farm Bureau perspective, making sure policy's right, but also, having a little bit of dirt under my fingernails time to time. We're helping NASA out with a NASA FIAT, which FIAT stands for Farmer Innovation Ambassador Team. Mm-hmm. Just again, if we know we've got Earth observation satellite, we've got other things that are up in the sky, but we're able to pinpoint or track down to the field level different management types. And working with our good friend Ignacio Ciampidi, who's sadly no longer here at K-State, but is over at Purdue, he keeps telling us, hey, from a satellite imagery, I can tell you on your field where your high protein wheat is. So rather than commingling it, if I can tell you got 20 or 40 acres in the northwest corner of a quarter that's going to be high protein, you would probably want to go put that in a separate truck and take it to somebody that's going to pay you a higher premium for the high pro wheat. And then, the rest of it that just kind of would be average at best or whatever it may be, then that's where you would put in your normal, commerce channels. So again, if we know we've got eyes in the sky that can help us make those type of management decisions, let's figure out a way to get NASA more involved in production agriculture. You can take that soil health wise, you can take that groundwater decline wise. There's a number of different ways I think this NASA FIAT project has merit and can add value to Kansas farmers and ranchers.
Think how cool farming is going to be for the Flickner kids about 20 years from now.
I wish Dad was here, and I guess when you interview him, my boys, they're late middle school or late elementary school and middle school now. But we actually had NASA on the farm about 3 or 4 years ago. And, the farm was cool, big toys, this and that. But, boy, when you actually got NASA and had the NASA meatball and the emblem and they were giving out stickers and really kind of coaching and training them, I think that will open up a whole nother avenue of individuals out there that maybe didn't have the privilege of growing up on a farm, or maybe the farm can't support two brothers or a brother and a sister coming back to the operation. But if you can still be involved in agriculture and feel value and that you're providing a very beneficial and necessary service, I think that's a whole nother way to get folks really involved and excited about agriculture in the future.
Great. Ryan, it's been wonderful talking with you. We'll have you back again, and there's plenty more we can talk about.
Appreciate it, Aaron.
Thank you to Ryan Flickner with Kansas Farm Bureau for joining me on this episode of the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. If you have any follow-up questions for Ryan, just email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. And you can find all previous episodes at wheatsonyourmind.com or wherever you find podcasts. Thanks for listening.